on air, Nwokes on air, Nwokes on air. You're listening to the podcast recording of Chidubem Okichuku and Akim-Maria. This is our 5th episode discussing institutions in Nigeria. How are you doing, Nwokes?
I'm doing good, Nwokes. For those paying attention, this is a great introduction from Chidubem, and I think she did a great job. We should give her a round of applause. Okay. What do you think about that, Nwokes? Should we keep it on board? I don't know. I'm shy.
You're shy, like the way you answered. Because you never get to ask. You never get asked. That's why, right? With me asking you how you are, you always ask me how I am.
Okay, let's keep going then. Let's keep going. So I'm doing good. I'm doing great. It's a wonderful day. I'm here and I'm making this wonderful recording. I'm looking to make this wonderful recording with you, Nwokes, and I'm smiling.
Yeah, same, Nwokes. So.
Yeah, institutions.
Yeah, institutions. Well, I think we should start with a brief definition. Ready for that, Nwokes, or should I go?
I think you should go first because obviously you kicked off the podcast, so you going first today, being the leading lady. Let's get it done.
Leading lady, I like that alliteration. Institutions are basically organizations that function for a specific purpose, typically one that is codified, one that is structured, and could be for social purposes as well. An example being academic institutions, governmental institutions, political institutions. There's so many of them. But yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a very on point definition and very relevant for what we're discussing today. Also, searching on Google, I discovered that there are 2 other definitions, and just to kind of put all of these into context in our discussion, I just wanted to mention them at least once for our listeners. An institution is also an established law or practice, such as the institution of marriage, and an institution is also the action of instituting something. I've heard never use a word to define the word you're trying to describe, but this is what Google gave me, so we're gonna try and work with it. And they described an example of being a delay in the institution of proceedings. That's a little bit more complex and seems like more of a verb than a noun, which is what we're dealing with today. For all of our English experts out there. So let's focus with your definition of the specific or specified purpose of an organization being an institution, such as the academic institution, which you mentioned. If you are okay with that, Nwokes?
I am. I think that's a very good example, very basic, simple example for everybody to, relate with. So let's keep that.
Sure. Because we're discussing Nigeria as in 12 random subjects and looking for solutions for progress with regards to the country as a whole, with regards to the idea, however you view Nigeria, we're going to be discussing some of the Nigerian institutions and how citizens can impact this, how the outward appearance of these institutions are viewed, and what the principles of these institutions should be, and just anything that basically pops into mind that we feel that you listeners would love, knowing what we discuss, would love to listen to. Nwokes, I just wanted to start off basically with a story from my cousin. Actually, he shared a post on Instagram saying that he went on the Nigerian Police website, I believe, to look for to look for the definition, to look for the origin of the Nigerian police, and I saw this post as myself. I couldn't believe it, and it's so funny that it comes back to me right now because on the post it was giving I mean this. I'm gonna ask my cousin for it. I'm gonna probably put this in the link in the description for those of you curious. It started to define the origin of the word police from Greek times, not Greek times, from Greek civilization origins. That's the definition that the Nigerian police website had for the origin of Nigerian police. I was, for lack of a better word at this point in time, gobsmacked. As I'm sure he was as well, because it was just a post. I don't necessarily think I reacted to it, but it was so hilarious. So the institution of the Nigerian Police Force is just an area of one of the institutions in Nigeria that is meant to protect the citizens. The purpose is to protect, enforce law, and keep law and order in society, in Nigeria society. And it's one of those things where even just you want to find out what the origin of such an institution is, and you face a history lesson, effectively.
Yeah.
What do you think about that, Wolves?
I think it's a very thorough. It was a very thorough method to take, to making that definition. The fact that they went into the history, it was very lessive, and that's a good thing. Whether or not it's completely relevant would depend on what kind of information was actually given. So I think, like, if you're taking a historical angle just so that you can go into depth, that's fine. If you take a historical angle and it's no longer relevant to contemporary times and to the contemporary definition of who a policeman is, then that doesn't hold true for something that we need to know for now. So I think that we probably need to bridge the gap between giving historical lessons and actually focusing on the contemporary changes that have been made. And once we get into a good midpoint between those two, then we have a relevant definition. Till then, no.
So, what you're saying is that you think it's relevant for the Greek origin of the word police to be on the Nigerian police website. That's interesting.
I think if they have a reason for it, if they are doing it because they want to seem knowledgeable and cultured and sophisticated, no. Okay. But they're doing it because they actually have a point to make with that. That's fine. But do we know if they had a point to make with that?
When I looked at the post, it was it looked like the extract from a Wikipedia article. I'm not necessarily saying that I didn't visit the website. I just saw the extract, and obviously people can manipulate images. The reason I didn't necessarily question whether the image was manipulated was because my cousin is actually a lawyer in Port Harcourt, and he's actually he has a reputation to uphold. So for him to post something that he would have been altered is not necessarily something I would associate with him. So having seen that, I just didn't necessarily think that maybe if a student were trying to be a police officer and needed to know about the origin of the word police, having to go through all of that to solve a crime in Nigeria or to enforce the law, that is a heavy task. I mean, that's for a particular police officer when you're in police school or something along those lines. But for a visitor to a website, I think it might be a bit much, too much information. Not being critical of it, but just to try and marry the idea of the police institution to its purpose in Nigerian society. What we need to do, knowing like Nigeria's structure, which I personally would describe it as a more simple structure compared to Western or Western cultures or Eastern based cultures in the Far East and the Orient, as it were. The structure of our organization it should be simplified. The focus should be simplicity, because we need to make sure that we're getting things done before we can start to complicate and then overcomplicate the situation. Let's first of all make sure that most Nigerians first of all understand. When I say most, the majority of Nigerians, aside from the 1% who can afford, the data and the technology that can get them on the website. If I go to an internet cafe as an average Nigerian and I browse I want to get information about the Nigerian police. I want to know what their agenda is for that year, their crime rate is, their success in catching criminals and upholding the law, what projects they have, their recruitment policy. Those are the kind of things that I want to see on a practical level, because then it would enable me to plan around the Nigerian police institution and then see how effective they are, which is their job at the end of the day for the purpose, as we discussed, organization for a specific purpose. The specific purpose of the police institution will be to uphold the law and to make sure that the citizens are in not just only in line with it, but the law is being applied to them fairly as well. So this to overcomplicate that situation by giving them Greek history, which should not be reserved for like a police academic that is going to police academy or to study the origin of police. I think that's where it should be reserved for. I definitely understand your point as well, where they're trying to inform like the general public as to the origin of police. But in terms of a practical sense and keeping things simple, based on what Nigeria's society is today, you know, it's if you're overcomplicating your outward appearance, people are going to see it as a complicated thing, and
Yeah.
it's important to balance that out simply. You know, not just in the
Mm-hmm.
police institution as well. The reason we're mentioning the police institution is because it was just an example that came up, but the other institutions as well. Wokes, do you have any institutions that you want to touch on personally?
I mean, there are a couple. I think maybe coming from my background, my interest
Mm.
as an aspiring lawyer, barrister, I would say I'm very interested in the judicial institution in
Yes.
Nigeria, like how the law is interpreted, how the judiciary is structured, the appointment of judges, whether it's fair or whether it is a political process that is not fair, and and I think that, looking at, for example, the Nigerian Bar Association and the
Mm-hmm.
past people that have headed it, the past presidents, and the way that it is being run, as just one example,
Yeah.
I'm not always impressed with the structure of proceedings and the way things are run. And I
What
think
would
that
impress you
applies. I
on
think
a
what would
Nigerian
impress
level,
me
putting
is
it in
when,
the Nigerian context? Yeah.
within Nigerian context, what would impress me is a
Mm-hmm.
situation where the where everything is being done according to merit and
Mm-hmm.
according to the honesty in each person's capability, as opposed to who they are or their social standing or what you hope to achieve by putting them in power. I like, my ideal situation would be one in which there is no political attachment. It is just run as a meritocracy.
Mm-hmm.
And this pertains to Nigeria as a whole, but I'm just giving this as a particular example. That I look to a system where things are done according to who deserves it and not who
Yeah.
should have it because of who they are, And I think that till we get to that point, we aren't actually living the Nigerian dream.
Mm-hmm.
Nigerian dream, if we could, liken it to the American dream in that sense of the ideal Nigeria or the ideal Nigerian situation for the everyday citizen that would like to have one day. And I think, looking at the judiciary, like, we are not being as it is the law, like it is the one arm of government that is meant to be as untainted and pure as it can be, because justice is something that our country should always stand for. And I think when you have a system where justice isn't being applied in the way it should be, justice is not as classical as it is meant to be, you're losing a lot of the grace that the country is meant to have, and it feeds into a lot of problems that we're facing. So many problems.
Understandably, you mentioned the idea of meritocracy, and I also share the same sentiment that meritocracy is a way of appointing. It should be the way of appointing people. You know, if we look at it from an objective point of view, it's a factor you apply
Yeah.
to making that decision of who should fulfill a role. There are also other factors that go into that. You know, sometimes some people are more sociable, and some people actually have more knowledge. So, for instance, somebody that is practicing law in the north of Nigeria may not necessarily fit into the southern law system, even though they have a better merit grade for merit reason or merit basis than someone from the south. And it might also be personal choice that the person doesn't necessarily want to go and practice any law, I any law, should I say course, or how do you describe it? Any law stance, situation, position in the southern part of Nigeria. So that would also exclude them from being selected. However, um, what if based on and meritocracy is also applied to a complex system? You know that the exams, the qualifications, the other institutions backing this individual that is proven to have the right merit to fit into that position. So there's a lot of complexity attached to that. What if what we're experiencing in Nigeria, or would you say that what we're experiencing in Nigeria is as a result of people trying to simplify that system, or are there any other means? I know Nigeria has reputation in the past, but aside from that Nigerian reputation, is there any other reason that um, an individual would be selected for a position other than merit?
I think one reason why a person will be selected for a position other than merit is because they do not deserve it, but then if they were put in that position, they would benefit the people that want to put them there.
Okay.
So whilst they don't actually deserve it on paper, substantively, they don't actually deserve that position. That them being in that position will be beneficial to the people that want to appoint them there. I think having a system where just a few hands can appoint people to important positions is already a dangerous system, because you're leaving everything to you're leaving everything to the choice of those few people. However, their discretion, however they choose to make that choice is their business.
What about positive reasons, though, other than the fact that something as as negative as it benefiting someone else? But in terms of like looking at it from a progressive standpoint, because that would mean that there's a situation there that that needs to be resolved, other than within that system, not necessarily on a Nigerian perspective, but within that institution itself. Is it only is there any positive reason other than a merit-based choice that another individual will be selected for that? Because we know about Nigeria's reputation. It's tough. It's one of those things that one of the arguments is that Nigeria is not the only place that this kind of thing happens. So what would the other justifications in the other places, other than the nepotism aspect of it, as it were?
I think okay, fine. I think in instances where I think that in instances where it is not based on nepotism, it is then based on the image of that institution. So, for example, if it's not directly because of the people that choose to or hope to benefit from putting that person in that position, then it's because they believe that putting this particular person who doesn't actually deserve it in position would make that institution look better. So it might not be a direct financial or otherwise sort of gain to the people putting them in that position per se, but it might be something where just the currency of that action brings back a lot of rewards. Just like maybe sometimes a person does not deserve it, but then they are better fit for it.
That's interesting.
So they don't deserve it in terms of like ticking the semantic boxes of what they should have done to get there, but then that they can do the job, and they probably are more fitting for the job than the person who actually deserves it, in quotes.
Interesting.
So you put that person instead.
I like this example you've given because it's very closely linked to the nepotism argument, because it's very difficult to differentiate only if you're able to
find the ideal example.
Yeah, find the ideal example and know this person's background, know the history, delve deeper, and actually see the results of what this person is doing. If the results are good, based on the criteria of if this person is a good fit for this position, even though this person doesn't necessarily qualify in all the criteria that we're setting, it's difficult to differentiate between that and nepotism, if you know what I mean. So it would have to be based on the results, and it's also a situation where, how would you, even if somebody passes that off as, okay, this person is a good fit, but in actual fact, it's nepotism, and that's made evident later down the line, and this person has actually delivered the results. Would that be a fair situation? Because I can actually see a lot of this occurring in Nigerian institutions, based on how I've observed the system to work in the past. Some people say, just give this guy a chance, just give this guy a chance. He may not necessarily have the qualifications or the right or any other aspect that is necessary for the role, but he's delivering on the results. Is that a good way to appoint somebody to a role? And do you know what I mean when I say this?
I think like I think we're breaking into different layers now, Nwokes. I think that
we are actually.
We definitely are. There's elements of nepotism, and then it's almost as if we're trying to say that there's a good nepotism. Like there's a shade of nepotism that's not necessarily geared toward bad results or based on a bad premise per se, but it comes off as nepotism if it is not well assessed. So on the surface, it might look like nepotism, but then if you dig deeper and you have more information, you find that it's not really that. It's something else. So I suspect that in that kind of situation, then it would be applicable to say that, if a person is better fit for something and on paper they don't meet the criteria, they should be given that position. Mm-hmm. But then you need to also make it clear to the general public who deserves to know that they are being given the fair person to be their leader, in that situation, that this choice is not being made in the classical way for this particular reason which is justifiable, so that people believe that power is legitimate. So if you're going to choose someone that shouldn't on paper be the right person to choose, then you have to make it very clear why you're making that choice, so that people accept and appreciate that choice and respect it. Because if not, then they are left to make their own choices as to why, their own decisions, come to their own conclusions as to why you've made that choice. And many of those conclusions might just assume that choice was made because of a bias. And if you think something is from a bias, would you respect that decision? Very unlikely.
Most people wouldn't. I think what we've concluded is that even selecting somebody in a positive light is hard enough. Not to now mention when you add in a negative idea, like, for example, nepotism or any other negative concept one is able to come up with. So it's already doing good is hard enough. To now add something bad to that, or to have a system that doesn't support doing good, now even makes it more complicated. I think that's what we established in this episode of Nwokes on Air, and I think it's a good point to end on. Do you have any ideas for any topic for next week at this point?
Not really, Nwokes, because we've actually kind of broken into so many layers, not particularly one trend I see per se. So maybe for once, let's keep our listeners intrigued. Let's not tell them. Maybe for once, let it be a surprise what we do next time.
Oh, okay. So you want to have some discussion outside of the podcast? Cool. I'm down with that.
They say great minds think alike. So let's know what you guys are thinking.
That's true. Also, let us know some suggestions. Let us know how we're doing. What you want to hear more on the show. Any suggestions? We're willing to involve our listeners. You see, it's not just a 2-person job. It's a collective. We need to get that vision out there, completed. So if you're listening, you feel like you have something to contribute. You feel like you were touched by something that you heard on one of our podcasts. Please get in touch. Leave a comment in the comment section, and we'll include it in the next podcast. Thank you, listeners, and
we definitely will.
Nwokes, any final thing to say?
Nothing major. Just next time you see somebody in a position of power, ask yourself: have I asked why the person is there, and do I want to know? I think we should ask more.
Good questions, right there. Good questions. So, listeners, if you liked this podcast, please click the like button. If you loved it, subscribe, and. You heard, I think this was a very, very positive podcast. I definitely going to listen back to it myself. I'm going to try and take some notes from this and help Nigeria move forward, as it were. Say goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from me too, Nwokes. Thank you for listening.
Take care. Good luck, people.
Take care.
All the best.
Bye.